for liftoff in T-minus 30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Hey, welcome back. This is MBRR Media, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. I need to apologize to the subscribers, the channel members, the regular viewers, the hate watchers, my BCA agent and my FBI agent that have been assigned, and probably somebody from Flock at this point is probably watching me. I took a vacation from content. I did my last interview about a month ago, and I needed a break. And so I took a summer vacation, and I lost about 14 of you regular viewers. So, well, I don't know if you're regular, but I lost about 14 subscribers. So now I know how important I is. But anyway, thanks for being here. If you're watching from over on Vet Nation, say hi. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please make sure you subscribe to this channel and make sure you comment. Once again, for everybody, if you're going to have questions about what we're going to be talking about today, please feel free to ask them. Super chats help us see the questions better, especially when the chat is busy. Does it sound like I'm asking you to send me money? Yes. Yes, I am. So that's what the super chat is for, and I'd be stupid if I didn't use it. So in the meantime, thank you to the channel members. Thank you to Skipper for live streaming this over on Vet Nation. If you're watching on Rumble, thank you. If you're watching on Twitch, thank you very much for watching. And if you're watching here on YouTube, as always, thank you, channel members. You guys keep everything going. And I'm going to put this disclaimer out. You're going to have a Marine, a paratrooper, and an attorney in this chat today. So it's sure to be chaos. And there's one professional in this conversation, and it's not the Marine. And okay, for the sake of not losing my guest ahead of time, it's the attorney. That's the professional. So we'll see where it goes from here. You know, when I first swore an oath to the Constitution and to the Republic of the United States in 1991, yes, I'm that old. I was just telling one of the guests, Bryan, that I joined to go fight in the first Gulf War. Don't ask. I still understood what I was doing because back then I was still, unbeknownst to me, I was very much a natural rights advocate. I was a libertarian. I just masqueraded as a Republican. And so swearing an oath to the Constitution and to the Republic meant something to me. And I swore that oath repeatedly, multiple times throughout my life. Almost 13 years with the local sheriff's office. Many of you know my story and how I lost my career for fighting against and speaking out against COVID mandates in 2020 and 2021. But I've always been the person that stands my ground when it comes to the erosion of natural rights here in the U.S. Many of you would say our freedom of speech, our constitutional rights, our Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments, but the Bill of Rights is not what grants you the freedom of speech. The Bill of Rights is not what grants you the freedom to be free from unlawful search and seizure. It's not what grants you the right to be able to defend yourself or protect yourself. Those things are yours by the very fact of your existence. And the Bill of Rights and the Constitution do not fence us. They fence the federal government. And now with the advent of the 14th Amendment, it also fences local municipalities, states, and counties. And when I saw the story that we're going to be talking about today, I was like, wow, here is a guy I can relate to. He's literally been on the verge of being imprisoned for nothing more than exercising his natural right to freedom of expression, freedom of religion. And this isn't taking place in some hard left major metro area. This isn't taking place in Great Britain, where we've seen what is happening in Great Britain, people being arrested for praying silently outside of abortion centers or in other places, people being arrested for saying something that's unpopular. This is happening in a small agrarian rural Minnesota town. This is happening in the backbone, the spine of what makes America great. You city folk, you're fine. Don't get me wrong. I love you. Urban centers, we need urban areas as well. But what makes the U.S. great, what makes the U.S. tick, are the people who live and work and labor in the countryside, in small towns. That's what keeps this country going. It's not politicians in Washington, D.C. It's not politicians in your state capital here in Minnesota. It's not in St. Paul. It's the people in rural America that make America function. So when you see a municipality in a small town of less than 4,000 people decide that they're going to silence someone because they don't like what he's saying, that tells you the trajectory that this once great nation is on. Fights like this, if we lose them, mean we lose the republic. And I am not overreacting. This is 100% what it looks like to be losing your republic. You think that flock cams and Axon light pole cams and data centers and mass surveillance are bad? All of that stuff will continue to exist and get worse when they can silence us for saying things they don't like. So keep your ears open and pay very close attention to this conversation. And by the way, you may not like everything that Bryan has to say. You might not like what he has to say. I guarantee you there's probably some place where I disagree with Bryan and Mark. And we may have opinions that vary, and we may not even reflect those things in this conversation in a way that people can really grasp what happens when you can come together over something you disagree about, or despite something you disagree about, over something you do agree about. Now, I've done much of what Bryan is facing this assault on his natural rights. I've done much of what he's been doing for the last few years. We share that in common. We share our military history in common. Once again, he's the Marine, so we don't hold that against him. But I guarantee you there's probably some place where our opinions we express don't necessarily reflect the opinion of the other person. But there's one thing that we can all agree on. We need to be able to speak our mind about our religious views and our socio-political, philosophical views. And we should not have to worry about whether or not some elected or unelected public servant can strip us of those things. And make no mistake, the only reason that they can take those things away from us is because they have a monopoly on violence. They didn't send the city mayor out to shut Bryan down. They didn't send the city council out to shut Bryan down. They sent armed men with guns to shut him down. So don't think for a minute they won't do the same to you. All right, I set the stage for you. You guys can now look very professional and well-spoken. So, oh, I accidentally muted Mark. There we go. Mark, Bryan, thank you for being here. The floor is yours. You start talking and I will interrupt. Who wants to go first?
Go ahead. 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 Go
Mark?
Brian, why don't you share your story? It's a
Sure.
great place to start.
Well, first, Todd, thank you for having me on and taking the time to have this conversation with me. I'm sure there's going to be more than one point where we may disagree in this conversation, but that's why these conversations are important to happen. Because if we can't have these conversations in the public square, and if we can't be free to speak the truth, then the truth can never be learned. The truth can never prevail. And ultimately, how can they believe upon whom they have not heard? And how can they hear unless there's a preacher? So there's a fundamental practice of Christianity to go to where the people are and open your mouth, as Proverbs 31 says, and be a voice for the voiceless. And in this circumstance, it's those who can't speak. And so it would be the children in the womb that this nation, on an industrial scale, is slaughtering. And we call it a right. Well, if it's a right, then we must be able to justify where this right comes from. Otherwise, it's an unjustifiable action. And that conversation is trying to be shut down in the public square.
And that's what you've been doing in your hometown for several years.
Trying to. Because of the resistance that I've encountered from the beginning when I first tried to start, and wasn't even at the farmer's market where I first tried to start. It was on a street corner with my amplifier, just trying to preach the gospel. And then slowly, as I learned,
so you've been doing this in the city that you live in is Benson, correct?
Correct.
And so you've been doing this locally for some time, and you have been met at every turn with resistance, not just from people disagreeing with your message, but official governmental interference.
Yes. For the most part, I have been resisted by the officials of the city. And then given a runaround on some sort of permit they say I need in the law, but then not providing me a way to get that permit. And so I'm just like stuck in this place of, okay, can I speak without the threat of arrest or fine or citation? Or am I just going to have to push the limit until something happens because I have no other choice?
Risk the arrest.
Right.
How many years has this been going on? Because it kind of reached a pinnacle here very recently where they really started to crack down.
It's a long story of how we got to where we are here. But my ministry didn't necessarily start in Benson, right? So I've been to LA and Las Vegas, down to Florida. I've been all over the country to do evangelism with an organization called Sports Fan Outreach International. And they send men out to large sporting events all the time, all over the country. And so I kind of adapted their idea. And then I learned about abolition when it comes to abortion, right? So I'm not a pro-lifer. I'm an abolitionist. And so I don't believe in the regulation of abortion. I believe that abortion is murder, and therefore it ought to be treated as any other murder. And anyone who participates, including a mother, ought be charged with murder and tried under the same due process and case-by-case treatment of that abortion, right? Instead of saying, in this circumstance, you can kill your baby. So the isms and ideologies of pro-life don't line up with what we find either in natural law or in God's law. And so it violates both. And it violates the very system the natural law would appeal to, which would be the Constitution and the 5th and 14th Amendments. And so that's the conversation that I'm trying to have with these people. And that is the fundamental conversation that's being shut down.
And I'm imagining you've run into resistance, not just in your hometown, but other places as well, because I know yes. I did. I mean,
yes.
I was in a town about 18 miles from me doing gospel centered outreach several years ago. And the local police chief literally told me I had to stop because people didn't like what I was saying, and I was like, he tried to tell. He told me I needed to tone down my rhetoric,
Mm.
and so that's part of why your story appealed to me. I don't do the street ministry stuff as much anymore. Mostly, well, we could talk about that privately and personally sometime. But I've been there. I mean, I've faced resistance from law enforcement. Ironically, while I was in the career field, I've faced resistance from private citizens walking down the street, and angry people, and people who didn't know whether or not they should be angry or shouldn't be angry, and for all of it.
Mhm.
So I can only imagine there's probably not been a time you've gone out where you haven't run into some sort of resistance, but it feels
Well,
different.
there are
It
days
feels
where the Lord
different
is
when
kind.
it's true. But it feels different when all of a sudden you're approached by a guy with a badge, a gun, and handcuffs. It changes. It changes the environment. It changes
does.
the feeling of it, so to speak.
Well, there's a threat of force that enters
Yep.
into an otherwise peaceful situation. So the only actor in this whole scenario, in my opinion, is that is causing a disturbance or disturbing the peace would be the state, because they're the only ones introducing the threat of force, not me. I'm just standing there with a sign that says, "Don't murder your babies and believe in Jesus." So I don't understand, especially in the dynamic we find in Minnesota. Like, you can burn a city block, but you can't stand in an empty spot in the farmer's market peacefully. And so I don't understand the very system that we all scream and holler to, liberty, 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 has been weaponized against the actual peaceful speaker. And it's been sympathetic, or made to be sympathetic, to the criminal. And I'm struggling to understand this, because it blows my mind, especially when this nation, this state, this community of Benson, Minnesota would profess to have an undying love for their veterans, for their service members, for those who have spilled their blood in defense of the very rights that they claim to hold so dear. But yet the moment that they reach a message or see or hear a message that they don't agree with, their first instinct is to reach for the phone and, as you said, call the men with the badges and the guns.
And I know that for a lot of people who might be, catching this in passing, or or maybe are veterans that are watching, and there again, I'm a veteran. It sounds very counterintuitive to just merely refer to law enforcement as men and women, but men and women with badges and guns. It sounds almost like I'm demeaning people with that, but I want people to understand that it took me a long time to come to grips with just how much, and I think that's one of the places that Bryan and I probably would agree on, where I experienced the most culture shock, was for not everybody in the military, but a lot of us in the military, that oath meant something. And then when you go out to exercise what that oath was meant to defend and protect, and are immediately shut down or meet resistance from the government, the state that you serve, one of the first things that happens is cognitive dissonance. You're like, well, wait a minute, we're on the same side, bro. I'm a vet. I back you, man. I'm like, what do you I've always supported you. And like, now all of a sudden you're treating me like, as you said, like I'm the bad guy and the bad guys are the good guys. And
Right.
That's a painful realization for a lot of people who meet that
Well, it's interesting
that
because
disconnect
even
for the first time.
Oh, sure. Because for the veteran, for the citizen of this nation who has gone. And I think the stat, and I could be wrong, but I think the stat in this last 20 years of conflict, I think it was less than 10% of the U.S. population actually served. Right. So there's a very small percentage of our population that actually serves to defend, uphold, at least on paper. Right. We can disagree about the politics of the conflicts and XYZ. But what we're told is that they are going to do things to defend these liberties which we hold so dear. Well, I'm a citizen of this nation, too. And I'm part of that small percentage of the population. Like Paul says in the Bible, as they're getting ready to beat him, he says, I'm a citizen of Rome, and you go to beat me. Well, you couldn't just beat a citizen of Rome. Well, they respond with, well, lots of people buy citizenship in Rome. He said, yeah, but I have it by birthright. And so I have my citizenship as an American by birthright, and it has been sealed by the blood of my 4 friends who paid a price that the vast majority of this nation will never bear. Ever. And I am very angry with these people for betraying the very thing that they claim to hold so dear.
You manage your anger better than I do. I'll tell you that.
The Lord has done a great work in me, my friend, as he can do in anyone.
Counselor Mark, I'm just going to call you Mark.
That's great.
Can you tell I was used to dealing with attorneys?
I'm sorry.
Oh, not
Maybe
a
story there.
They're yeah. Oh boy. Don't get me started on prosecutors and defense, public defenders all working on the same. Never mind. Like I said, don't get me started. So, tell us, Mark, a little bit about yourself and the organization that you head up, because you guys have stepped in and have taken this case very seriously. Mm-hmm. And as we said pre-show when we were chatting, just checking mics and cams and stuff, you said this is a cut and dried case on the First Amendment. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how the organization, how you decided to go down this road.
Yeah. So the organization is called Center for American Liberty. We were founded back in 2019 by Harmeet Dillon, who now leads the Civil Rights Division at the DOJ. And we really got our start doing a lot of litigation during COVID. We were suing governors across the country for violating American civil liberties, shutting down your churches, shutting down your small businesses. I remember in Orange County, California, Governor Newsom criminalized, going to the beaches, only in Orange County, right? These are basic civil liberties protected by federal constitution and with respect to the beaches in Orange County, the state constitution of California. So our organization is set up to defend Americans' civil liberties and to intervene legally in courts across the country. So we came across Bryan's case, the situation. A colleague of mine found it on social media, and it's exactly what we are looking to do to protect Americans' free speech rights. And so, here was so interesting to me is that, Bryan went to the farmer's market, and the farmer's market, I would point out, is on publicly owned property. It's in a big parking lot. It's free admission. And the only people who are paying to be there's a $20 fee if you're going to set up a booth and engage in commerce. Bryan wasn't there to engage in commerce. He was there to express himself, like everyone else there who's expressing themselves. People are there wearing T-shirts for candidates, against candidates. People are there wearing a variety of messages. If you wear a Nike swoosh on your shirt, that communicates a certain message. Everyone else is allowed to express a message in that arena except for Bryan. And Bryan was told he had to leave if he didn't pay $20. Well, guess what? The First Amendment, you don't have to pay $20 to exercise your First Amendment right. That right has been endowed to you by your creator. And the Constitution says that Congress shall not create a law that infringes upon that right. So we feel very strongly that this is a very cut and dry, as I mentioned to you earlier, First Amendment challenge. You can't put a price tag on as this gateway, right, to be able to exercise your First Amendment right. That's a problem. It's also very problematic that Bryan has been issued now, I think on 2 occasions, Bryan, am I correct? 2 occasions, trespass citations. These
These are criminal. I want people to understand too. This isn't just, hey, you need to get off the property. He's now been received criminal charges is what he's received for.
Right. These are misdemeanor charges that carry with them fines and potential jail time. And so
in Minnesota, it's up to a year.
It's really important that regardless of the message, and here I think people on both sides of the aisle should care, because whether he's carrying a sign that advocates for abortion or opposes abortion, the principle that we fight for, freedom of speech, the right to petition the government for redress, that right is sacrosanct and it has to be protected. I always think about what does it look like? The political pendulum swings. And so this may be an issue because you're on the other side of the aisle and you disagree with Bryan's viewpoint. And you may be thinking, well, I don't want to hear it when I go to the farmer's market. But what if the political pendulum swings and you are no longer in that tyranny of the majority, right? You will have wished that you stood up for that principle of free speech when you had the opportunity to. And so that's why we fight every day in courtrooms across the country, because it is that principle of individual liberty, of freedom, that is so important. The founders knew it, and we know it still today.
Well, there's something else going on here too, and Counselor, you'll recognize this. It's what they're doing to Bryan has a chilling effect on everyone else.
That's right.
And so even though nobody else is technically being targeted here, what they're doing to Bryan is ostensibly targeting everyone and basically telling everyone we have the power to do whatever we want to do to you whenever we want to do it, and no one can stop us. And so anyone else who might be interested in taking part in the efforts that Bryan is engaging in, or even if they want to go out and do their own thing, are now going to look at a city like Benson, Minnesota and go, I don't know if I want to risk being arrested. I don't know if I want to risk criminal charges. And I'm sorry, we know this. Americans, for as much as we talk about liberty and justice for all and freedom of expression, we're kind of spineless. And when we see someone else suffer, we learn a lesson very quickly. And not all of us. Some of us are stubborn. Sometimes we're criminally stubborn. but most people, they learn the lesson that government wants us to learn when they go after someone like Bryan, or like the business owners you mentioned during COVID. You just knock out a couple of business owners during stay-at-home mandates, and all of the other non-compliant business owners quickly become compliant. And so even if this didn't go to court, it still sets a precedence, and it establishes a pattern and a track record. And I mentioned the Shiloh Hendricks case in Rochester, Minnesota from just last week. And obviously it was a year-long study of sheer waste of taxpayer dollars, for one. But her conviction last week, once again, no matter what you think of the words she was using, her conviction last week sets a precedence in Minnesota, and especially in Olmsted County, in Rochester, Minnesota, and Southeast Minnesota, that your words can be criminalized. And if Bryan loses this case, it establishes a pattern in, what would you call yourself, Southwestern? West Central?
Yeah, West Central.
West Central.
Yep.
Yeah, so now all of a sudden, now you have another case in Minnesota where if you don't fight this and win, there's more and more and more precedents being set. And I'm gonna do the odd thing here, Mark, and I'm gonna ask you a question. If someone like you doesn't step in, or fire somebody, an organization like Fire or whoever it might be, doesn't step in and take a case like this, and Bryan gets a conviction and can't find anybody to help him fight it, is this not yet another nail in the coffin to our civil liberties, to our natural rights, if if you were to lose a case like this or not fight it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Access to justice is monumentally important. And there was a day when the ACLU would defend even Nazis' speech in Illinois, right? And that's highly documented. Because again, it doesn't matter what the viewpoint is; it's the principle of free speech that we fight for and we hold so dear, because we want people to be able to express themselves. We recognize that we are endowed by our Creator with these inalienable rights, and so we have to continue to fight for them. To your point, if it does have a chilling effect, right? So Bryan is in a very public setting, the farmers market with so many members of his community there. They all see the police approach Bryan. They see the issuance of these citations, these trespass citations, and it does have a chilling effect on free speech more broadly. So it's really important that we do this the right way, and that's filing lawsuits in federal court, which is what we've done. In fact, this week on the 5th, there's a hearing on a temporary restraining order. We've filed a restraining order against the city and against several individual elected officials in their official capacity, not in their individual capacity, but as their official capacity as leaders of the city of Benson, because we want the courts to step in and to restrain this government overreach. And so that's why we have a court system. I think that was a brilliant kind of check and balance that our founders knew, recognizing human nature, recognizing the need for a system of checks and balances. That's why we have a court system. So I'm so proud that our organization is able to represent Bryan. Bryan is the one whose name is on the lawsuit. Like, Bryan is the one who's courageously fighting for free speech in Minnesota. It's one thing for us to file a lawsuit, from a comfortable office. It's another thing for a citizen in that community to put his name on a lawsuit and to sue to protect that constitutional right. And it's our privilege to be able to represent Bryan in this monumentally important lawsuit.
One of the things that my mind has shifted, my philosophy on this has shifted. When I went through my fight with my former employer, one of the things that people were asking me was, are you going to sue him? Are you going to sue him? Are you going to sue him? And I said, I'm not interested in suing over this. I just want it over with, and I want to be exonerated. And I have watched, and I don't know, Mark, if you've noticed this. Bryan maybe has noticed this, just because he's kind of, and don't take this, I'm not speaking down to you, Bryan. Bryan's maybe a little bit newer to watching some of this stuff play out, because he's in the middle of the fight for the first time. But if you've been in the fight for a while, like Mark has been, and like I have been, there has been an escalation since 2020 and 2021 in particular. There has been an escalation of governmental bodies, from local municipalities all the way up to the federal government, of they're trying to find as many loopholes as possible to silence people. And it has gotten worse. It's getting worse, like almost weekly. The measures, the steps that they're taking to shut people down. And I finally said a couple of years ago, I don't think any of this is going to get better simply by winning lawsuits. I don't think this is going to get any better simply by, doing First Amendment audits or whatever the case might be. I don't think any of this changes until the wage slaves, the tax cattle, start to feel it in their pocketbooks, because the municipalities are losing and spending thousands and thousands of dollars to defend themselves from lawsuits. And they have to look at the people that they depend on to fund them to say, well, we were going to put in a new city park, but we had to take all that money to go fight this case in state court or federal court because we violated this individual's natural rights, his constitutionally enshrined rights. So you guys don't get your park. And oh, by the way, we're going to also have to raise your taxes to continue to fund the city because we lost big time and we had to pay out. You know, and I know this is less about payout, but more about crushing these stupid actions by this municipality. But they don't learn, and a lot of them don't learn until they've had to pay out big and the people notice. And you hear that all the time, like, they paid how much for that guy that got punched in the face when he wasn't the suspect? It's like, where's that money coming from? And why do we have to pay it? And that's when people notice and they start demanding change. And because this is not going to be a cheap case for you guys to fight, and it's not going to be a cheap case for Benson to fight.
Yeah, but I would give a little maybe pushback on that premise, because I think that if we look back in 2020, I mean, that was one of the, at least in my lifetime, the most significant civil liberties crisis that I've seen, right?
Oh, for sure.
State governments across the country shutting down your churches, shutting down your businesses, even shutting down your ability to petition. I remember we had a case in Sacramento where we were representing peaceful protesters who wanted to socially distance outside the state house there in Sacramento. They wanted to put chalk on the sidewalk every 6 feet so they could stand and hold signs peacefully, which is very ironic that they were actually protesting the very executive order that was restricting their right to protest. And, you know, you file those lawsuits, you file the lawsuits to reopen schools, you file the lawsuits to reopen churches. And as a result of those lawsuits, those freedoms have been restored nationwide.
Absolutely.
And so I think I understand the frustration, because the court system is enormously, it is intentionally slow. It is created to be a slower process. Appeals, they take sometimes years, whereas the legislative process is intended to be more immediately responsive to the people. But I think the courts are still incredibly impactful in protecting those rights. And in these types of cases where you're dealing with the First Amendment liberty, the issue really isn't financial payout, because what's going to happen, you know, to your point, any type of fees that are paid are being paid out of taxpayer dollars. They're not being paid by public officials individually because they have immunity under the Constitution. So here it's about creating precedent that is going to be respected, not just in Minnesota, but hopefully far beyond, that will protect Americans' First Amendment freedoms.
You know, you bring up immunity, and a lot of people don't understand qualified immunity. They don't understand the fact that everybody in the public sector has it, which is mind blowing. I listen to Institute for Justice quite a bit. They have a couple of very, very good shows, and one of the things they're working on right now, have been for quite some time, is the issue of qualified immunity as it applies, you know, prosecutorial immunity, judicial immunity, and all, you know, legislative immunity, and all of that. Do you see any inroad on this? Because having read the synopsis of Bryan's case, and Bryan, you're right here, so you can tell me how many times it was said, but you were told, you keep coming out here, we're just going to keep writing you tickets, and it's just going to keep getting worse for you. At some point, do you see an inroad to look at the public officials in this situation, and not in their personal capacity, but in their official capacity, and say to them, look, you knew at some point what you're doing was wrong. So there is a real threat of personal liability here. That a court could rule the stripping of qualified immunity away from somebody in this situation if they see a progressive pattern of willful abuse of a citizen's natural rights, constitutionally enshrined rights? Or do you not think that that's something that would come up in this case?
I think with Bryan's case, I think what you would see as far as that kind of paradigm you just described is the court would look to see, is the government official acting outside of the scope of their job duties? If they're acting beyond the scope of their job duties, then the courts could certainly pierce that immunity claim. I think there is interest, perhaps nationally. I think there's going to be litigation challenging kind of the broad scope of immunity. I mean, the whole idea of immunity, it comes from English law, right? This idea of sovereign immunity. You cannot sue the king because the king has been appointed by God, and everything the king is doing is perfect and infallible. And then applied to American jurisprudence, we see that that kind of carryover, but we also have it because there are some jobs that no one would fulfill without having immunity, right? When you're a first responder and you're making that split-second decision that is life and death, without immunity, why would anyone put themselves in that position? Because we're not perfect, we're humans, right? But it's been applied with the growth of government, the growth of DC. It's being applied to jobs, like look at schools. We have private schools that fulfill the same function as public schools. The argument cannot be made that you have to have immunity to be a school teacher because the private school counterparts are doing it without that type of immunity. It's unnecessary. Right. And so I do think that in the future, there'll be legal challenges, and it wouldn't surprise me if the court listens to those challenges and is open to perhaps chipping away at just how vast and how broad that immunity is granted.
Well, it's a surprise that once a governmental body decides to give itself something, it just gets bigger. I don't know how that happens. I can't imagine that government cancer ever goes away. But and Bryan, I just want to clarify that, like, not that I don't believe you, but I want people to hear that. Like, that's what the officers involved said to you more than once, correct?
Well, so I can simply say that I was told that. I was told that, the more you come back, the more citations you're going to get. And then I clarified that I understood what the officer was saying. But one thing I would like to add, historically speaking, to this conversation and the First Amendment and the right to speak freely and when it is most oppressed, in relation to my work as an abolitionist, this is not the first time in our history as a nation. This same thing happened to the abolitionists of slavery. The government was used to silence them, to squash their ability to freely speak, in order to expose a hypocrisy in that view of even those who hold to natural law and their own system of freedom and liberty. And so most often, when the First Amendment is under threat, is when the First Amendment is being used to expose the nation's hypocrisy. And in the same way today, the abolitionists of abortion are exposing the nation's hypocrisy, even to the natural law, in that they deny Fifth and 14th Amendment protections to the human being child in the womb in violation of their own system. And so when we see force, i.e. the state, being used to squash the First Amendment, it is most oftentimes when a hypocrisy is being exposed.
Yeah, it's the idea of
speech. Go ahead. Sorry, Mark.
I'm sorry. We have the First Amendment to protect disfavored speech. I mean, it protects all speech, but the only speech that is in the crosshairs of government intrusion is disfavored speech. If you say things that are really polite and favored by all, there's no concern, right? It's disfavored speech. And again, people need to be concerned because the political pendulum swings. We see that every 4 years. And the principle is what has to be the thread that remains strong through that political pendulum, or else, you won't have those freedoms in the future.
Well, it's, you brought up, at the fight of the abolitionists leading up to the end of slavery in the U.S. Lysander Spooner, who was, a pivotal figure of the time, was an abolitionist, and there was a lot of attack on him for the things that he was saying, and his takeaway from it was, ironically, a little morose. He's like, the Constitution, and I'm paraphrasing, was either not designed to do what they told us it was designed to do, or it just was terrible at doing what it was designed to do. And and that comes from a place of this just really dark despondency of watching the things that your natural rights and whatnot be eroded over the government saying, well, this is for the common good, so therefore, since it's for the common good, we can do this. And I that theme, that thread, is in my mind every time I see a case like this. But I think especially in this case, because you were literally, like, I've watched so many of your interactions now. I'm just like, I'm like, I don't know how. Like,
I'm out there burning it down, dude. Let me tell you, I got the
clearly. I saw you throwing things at people. It was,
starting a riot, man.
Pitchforks and all that. But I know, because I've been there, literally been in the exact same position. I know, the people who make the calls. You know who they are. Without necessarily even knowing, you just know who they are, and you know why they're doing it. And when they see the cops show up and they write you the ticket, they're over there sometimes not even quietly clapping, cheering,
Sure.
And in what you were saying, Mark, is like, you just wait, folks. You won this one. Wait till it gets used against you. It's just the way it is. And that's it. But I think we have such a lack of foresight and even cognitive processing skills in the U.S. anymore. And I don't know, it might have something to do with these stupid things, but
well, I would suggest that perhaps it's also, we have a fundamental misunderstanding of what justice actually is in this nation. We have a system now that has been designed upon the subjective standards of mankind. So the fundamental question is what is actually good? What is good? Because natural law doesn't tell us what is actually morally just. We can only get that from Jesus Christ. He's the only source of morality that exists. And so more fundamentally, this erosion of the ability to speak, this erosion of being able to express yourself, this erosion of the value of human life, it all starts in the womb. And when we disregard the value of human life and the value of truth, because we abandon what truth is not something, it is someone. And the truth is Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ says, if you shed man's blood, by man's hand shall your blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man. And now, instead of putting murderers and rapists to death, we are a nation that sheds over 1 million babies and their innocent blood every year. And we are surprised, we're shocked that our First Amendment rights are being eroded.
Yep, absolutely.
It starts in the womb. It starts with life, the value of life, and it starts fundamentally with an issue of the heart of this nation. The whole head is sick. This nation has turned its back on God. I will give you a quote from an elected official in Minnesota, and it's written in chapter 1 of Common Sense and We Have Lost in Minnesota and these United States, which was written in response to this conversation. with Paul Anderson, who's a representative on the state level. And this is what is written. Representative Paul Anderson, you hold a 100% pro-life rating from Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life. Yet when asked if you would uphold your oath to the Minnesota Constitution, the United States Constitution, and establish justice for every citizen, including the preborn, your answer was no. No. Why? How long will you judge unrighteously and show partiality to the wicked? Psalm 82:2. That's betrayal. You placed power and your seat above the lives of the innocent. You showed yourself not as a guardian of justice, but its betrayer. God says in Psalm 139:13, for you formed my inward parts, you have wove me in my mother's womb. Those children are not unseen or unwanted. They are human beings, persons, woven together by their creator. The 5th and 14th Amendments forbid depriving any person of life without due process. Yet you betray us with your no.
I would posit, and Mark has fought cases like this before. I would posit that that's the exact problem that you're running into, Bryan, is that to me, it is content-based discrimination. It's content-based prosecution and persecution. You could have been holding a sign out there, even in a predominantly pro-life crowd, which, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that small town rural Minnesota is predominantly pro-life.
Bro, it happened to my brother down in Texas. My brother Jacob Miller at the Texas State Capitol. He was in a pro-life crowd as an abolitionist. He was not an amplifier.
And they turned on him.
He was standing there outside of their rally, their speech, and he was simply elevating his voice to be heard by the people in his proximity, telling them about the hypocrisy of the pro-life industrial complex. And the Texas state troopers forcibly removed him from the grounds.
And I remember seeing that. But if you went out and held a pro-abortion sign in a predominantly pro-life crowd, not one of them is going to call the cops. I only say that from experience because I've been outside all sorts of events, and I've yet to see anybody called on anyone holding a pro-life.
Oh, sure. I agree with the principle of what you're saying. If I was a Muslim in that market, they wouldn't have called the police. That's what I would argue. Or if I was a Buddhist, or if I went in there and I rolled out my prayer rug and faced Mecca and started praying, no one would say a word to me.
When you look at, we're gonna get into the technical weeds now. You ready, Mark? When you look at case laws, this is what I've been doing for the last 2 days. Just once again, I'm a nerd. I love case law. What do you think the defense is going to be from the municipality, from their attorneys? You and I know they have no defense. They're not gonna acknowledge that. They're going to lean on something like Sessler versus Davenport. Which is almost always the go-to in these situations, because they think it's a leg up. I don't see Sessler v. Davenport that way, but they have to have something. What do you think that their appeal is going to be? Is it going to be something like Sessler v. Davenport? Is it going to be common good, common order? What are they going to be able to appeal to? Because I just don't see it. This is more cut and dried than the Shiloh Hendricks case, frankly. It's like way more cut and dried.
Yeah.
But I think there's got to be a defense somewhere for them. They have to have some idea, and I cannot find it. So I'm going to lean on the one person in the room right now who can make the argument. The floor is yours.
I think in case opposing counsel's watching, I don't really want to do their homework for them, but I would
Well,
anticipate.
and you don't have to if you, in case they're watching and
No,
you
it's
don't
fine.
want to.
We're gonna beat that argument anyway. So if they are watching, this is a really crappy argument. So feel free to put it on paper.
Love it. I love that. That's
But
you're coming back on, bro.
You're going to argue that somehow it's viewpoint neutral and reasonable. Okay, both of those arguments will fail. They have a policy that is unbelievably vague with respect to amplification. There are no rules. There is just a prohibition to amplification. There's no process for appeals. There's no actual standards in which elected officials are to look at and to evaluate when deciding whether someone can use an amplification device or not. They just deny. It looks like they just deny applications, permit requests for amplification for Bryan and for speakers who they disagree with, but allow for certain government voices, schools.
Whoa, wait a minute. So they actually allow some amplification permits?
For government voices, they do. They like the farmers market is allowed to have amplification. Bryan's not. Schools are allowed to use amplification. You go to a football game, they're announcing the game. They're using amplification for that. The rule is 50 feet. So they're picking and choosing which voices are allowed to be heard and which are not.
So they're giving amplification permits to the farmers market people?
Yeah.
But they won't give it. They flat out now. Okay, so Bryan has applied for one of these.
Look, bro, I can't even apply for one.
Right, but he's requested it on multiple occasions.
They don't have a process.
The process is vague. It is unconstitutionally vague, and because it is so unconstitutionally vague, on its face,
that's a facial cause.
It creates unbridled discretion for government employees to pick and choose who has First Amendment rights and who doesn't. That is on its face unconstitutional. So it's not reasonable. It's not viewpoint neutral. Those arguments are going to lose. And I feel bad. I actually feel bad for the officers who are tasked with enforcing a unconstitutionally vague policy. It is elected officials who are putting these officers in positions that they can't win because they're being asked to enforce something that, one, is unconstitutional on its face and needs the court to intervene to provide guidance. But they're also asking these officers to, in some manner, understand the purpose of this law or the purpose of these policies when those are not clearly articulated. So I actually think there are officers, and Bryan, you're the one who's had interactions with these officers in person. I think there's a lot of officers who would actually really appreciate understanding from the court where these lines fall with respect to legal and illegal activity, because I think what's happening here is they're being directed to enforce laws that are unconstitutional. And I think that there would be a lot of appreciation when they are no longer being asked to do something like that.
Well, which goes to cause for what I've been talking about for a long time is that, like, any cop, if you catch him when he's his most honest, maybe he's 3 shots in, I don't know, but any cop when he's most honest, anybody in the law enforcement world when they're most honest, they'll tell you, like, we don't know anything about case law, and other than Pennsylvania v. Mims and Terry v. Ohio. That's all they know about case law, and then like maybe Graham, right? But we don't know anything about case law, and we know nothing about constitutional practices at all. And you ask them, well, how much training did you get? 2 days in academy or 2 days in school. Well, how much do you talk about it, afterwards? We don't talk about it. And so they run into a case like this where you've got your city bosses barking at you, telling you, we want that shut down. They don't give them a reason. They just go shut that down. And they're like, okay, I guess that's my job. And some of them mean well, but they go home confused at the end of the day. So that's an interesting twist to this, is that if Benson starts to write their code differently now, their ordinances now, it's too late. The damage is done. It can't stop the damage that's been done. 2, this might actually compel municipal law enforcement, county law enforcement, state law enforcement to start having some harder conversations with themselves about how are we going to train officers. It's great to talk about de-escalation. It's great to talk about, critical incident training and, having them on critical incident teams. But also, what are we going to do to train our officers to recognize when something is constitutionally protected activity and they're not obligated to violate that just because the mayor or the city council or somebody at the farmer's market doesn't like it, and how they can address that with the general public. Because when the general public calls on somebody like Bryan and says, hey, there's a guy out here and he's really offending people with this sign, they expect the cops to come shut him down. That's their expectation. And that's why they call the cops, because they know they can't do anything about it. So they call the enforcers. And so have you run into, like, and I'm not asking in particular about your case, Bryan, with Benson, but Mark, have you run into any officers in depositions or whatnot that are going, we just need some guidance because we don't have any?
Yeah. Cases across the country, you see this type of theme where the legislature has done a really poor job. And as a result, those tasked with enforcing the law are put in an impossible position. And so it's not a phenomenon unique to Benson. It is something you see in jurisdictions, elsewhere as well.
There was one city in particular that I've been to doing evangelistic type work, Nashville, during the Music City Grand Prix. And this is an example of there's a Tennessee state trooper came over to us, and that year the city had made a policy that any like street performer, you couldn't be stationary. You had to keep it moving because they were trying to avoid impeding the flow of foot traffic even more so than was unavoidable, right? However, when they came over to ask us to, hey, you got to move, you got to keep moving, you can't be stationary, we asked them, okay, we understand when it comes to like street performers, things like that. However, we're not doing that. We are preaching the gospel, and that is a constitutionally protected activity. And so was any consideration given to the differences between one and the other when you guys were told this policy and told to enforce it? And this particular trooper, he said, I don't really know right now, but let me call my sergeant and I'll get back to you. So he did. He comes over and he says, we have no idea, so you guys can stay.
It's refreshing when you run into an officer like that. And I say it's refreshing when you run into an officer like that because I have had those rare occasions where I have run into officers like that. And I just had Mark will get a kick out of this. Just last year, actually, just June, I think it was, in my own town. As part of my media coverage, I have a think local, act local aspect of what I do with my channel. And we were flooding, and I live in a town that's literally split in half by a creek. And we're called Spring Valley for a reason, right? It's not just a quaint name that people put in there to make you think it's a fun place to live. And the town was split in half by this flood. And so I had to drive way out of town and get to the other side of town. And as I was coming back around, I noticed the water was receding. So I decided, as I was doing this live stream commentary about the town and how our city responds to the flood and whatnot, I decided to go get up very close to the edge of the waters as they're receding. And I walked right past state trooper who had the state highway blocked on his side. And I was doing some commentary, and a local firefighter came up and grabbed me by the arm and said, you got to get out of here. And I'm like, don't touch me. He goes, I told you have to leave. This area is closed. And I'm like, dude, I'm an adult. And he said, that doesn't matter. You're coming with me. And he tried to grab me again. And I pulled away and I just kept filming. And he goes, that's fine. I'll go get the trooper. And he went up to the trooper, and the trooper's going, and I turned, and he never did come, he's like, so this firefighter, and bless his heart, he's a volunteer firefighter in a local community, and I get it. He doesn't want to have to send somebody into the water after some old fart who's trying to film floodwaters. But the trooper's like, what do you want me to do? And I talked to him, and he goes, hey, he's got every right, whether he's media and by your definition or not, he's got every right to do what he's doing. And I am not going to tell a grown man that he can't be doing what he's doing. And I was like, you're going up on YouTube, bro. Like, and people are like, all you ever do is bash cops. And like, here I am. I have proof. I don't. I said something very positive about the trooper. And it was because it was so refreshing, because I've been places where the officer would have come up and did whatever the bidding of the firefighter was in those moments. So,
well, none of this is in any way like anti-cop.
No,
right? Like I even expressed
I know that
to the officer, right, who gave me the citations, that I appreciate Benson Police Department, that concerning, categorically speaking, they have been one of the better jurisdictions. Outside of these few incidents, they've generally left me alone. Unfortunately, the gravity of the incidents where they're resisting me is such as it is, right? So, but he even expressed that he's like, I get that there's crimes of disorderly and trespassing, but you also have a First Amendment right to be here. And then he even expressed gratitude for somebody being out and doing what I'm doing. And so the officer, and I'm not against him either, but I am against the governing authorities who have equipped a system of tyranny to be run by a select few members of the community because they have some sense of authority that the Constitution does not grant them.
I think that one of the common mistakes that people make, especially when you're doing government accountability stuff like I do, is that whether you're calling out a city council or a school board or a mayor or something, or a cop or a law enforcement agency as a whole, that somehow if you're calling them out for taking part in a corrupt system or a tyrannical system, then therefore you must also hate the people who are wearing the uniform. And I do draw that line with people. I said, look, no, I can be against their actions. I can be fundamentally and radically opposed to the actions that they take that go beyond the scope of what they should be doing, or even sometimes within the scope of what they should be doing. I can be radically opposed to that without once ever wanting to express hatred for those individuals, and even still recognize a need for them in the legitimacy of what they're supposed to be doing. And I think that's a very difficult mindset for people to wrap their own minds around, is because they see calling something out as somehow you must therefore be opposed to all the individuals. And if you're not opposed to the individuals, then you have to support everything that they do. And oftentimes, and I'm sure you've heard this, Bryan and Mark, I know you've heard this. Well, if your client, or if you weren't doing X, and they wouldn't have to be there doing that. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your fault. You brought it on yourself. Sure.
Yeah.
And
it's oftentimes something that people say to defend something that they ultimately they know, especially like, because the whole idea of like natural law is that we naturally know that these things are good or bad, right? So they naturally know, like, just like Romans chapter 1 says, because that which is evident of God, he has made evident to them through that which has been made, right? To the degree that everyone has knowledge of God, but they don't have a saving knowledge of God. But they know he exists, but they suppress the truth in unrighteousness, and then they profess to be wise, but they become fools. And what they don't understand is they are setting themselves up to be crushed under the same tyrannical system that they have now used to try to oppress someone else. Because the communists say it. All these people who do these types of things, they are the useful idiots that are used in the collapse of a free republic.
Mark chuckled when you said that. It's
a historic quote. Okay, don't.
No, I know it's great. I just like the fact he's like, we're not going to use that in court, Bryan.
We don't need to. That's the beauty of this case. The First Amendment is, the case law is very strong. We're really encouraged when we as we continue to prepare for Bryan's oral argument on the TRO hearing this week. We're very confident, and again, the case law is really strong with respect to the First Amendment and your ability in a public forum like this.
So you've got you have an injunction in place basically against the city right now. Go ahead.
The hearing for the injunctive relief is this week. Okay.
And what court is that taking place in?
It's in federal district court. They're in St. Paul, I believe.
It's in St. Paul. You've got somebody on the ground here for that?
Yes. Yeah, we have local counsel in Minnesota, and then I have a colleague who's gonna argue the case.
So she's got the local. She has the local bar helping her.
Well, yeah, you have to be licensed in the state.
Licensed in the state, yeah.
And there's no way for us to be licensed in all 50 states. That would be very cost prohibitive.
No, not at all. I don't know why.
Partner with existing firms in those states.
Yeah. Can you say which firm you work with, or is that off limits?
No, I can. Let me look at the papers for a moment, because again, I'm not going to be the one arguing this case, so I am blanking on the name of the local counsel we have on this one. But
because anybody who is willing to fight this case, I would love to know who they are. Because Minnesota has a pretty good Minnesota-based group that works very, very hard on a lot of the same things, but definitely at a Minnesota level. Are you expecting that you're gonna see this overturned in the? I don't want to say this. Are you expecting that you'll see this overturned very early, or do you think it's going to end up having to go to the entire 8th Circuit?
Well, let's see. Okay, so let me answer this in two parts. First, the firm is Cross Castle PLLC. Okay. Also, I've gotten at this point, I can never predict what a court is going to do.
No.
I do not read tea leaves. I am not skilled. I'm in that regard. And it's usually the cases you think like there's no way, and then somehow that's the case that surprises you. I think we have a very, very strong likelihood of succeeding at the district court level. However, if we are unsuccessful at the district court level, I think the 8th Circuit will be very friendly to this. And if it comes to it, our team is prepared to take Bryan's case to the Supreme Court if necessary.
So strategy. What?
I made Bryan smile this time. It wasn't.
That's crazy. I live in the town. I think there's 200 people, man. What are you talking about, Supreme?
I actually think that the Supreme Court put something in place like years ago about not allowing Marines access to the Supreme Court.
It's because we eat all the crayons, dude.
Yeah, it's strategy-wise, when you guys look at a case like this and you go straight to a federal filing, is it strategic, or is that really your only option, or is it? Because most people look at this and they go, how do I want to say it? Well, it's happened in Benson, therefore you have to start at the local level for all of this. And I have a hard time explaining to people, this is one area that I'm not good at explaining, that you don't necessarily always have to rely on the state courts, even though it's taking place in a very particular state.
Right.
That what gives the federal courts supremacy in this case?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as supremacy. I mean, here we have dual sovereignties, right? You have a state court system and you have a federal court system. As a general rule, Bryan can bring this in state court if he likes. However, there are circumstances in which you can elect to bring the case in a federal court. If it is what they call diversity of jurisdiction, which we don't really need to get into the details of right now, it's kind of 1L civil procedure nerdy, or the other way you get into federal court is if you have a federal question. So if the case arises out of a controversy that is stemming from the Constitution, which is exactly what's happening here. We have a First Amendment issue before the court. So because of that, it is arising out of the Constitution. It allows Bryan to go into federal court as opposed to state court. I think here, the federal court option is a great option for this case, which is why it was filed there, because there's so much case law, not just in the Eighth Circuit, but across the country and from the U.S. Supreme Court with respect to free speech. And so here, if you're looking at what does that pathway look like for success, I feel very, very good with this case being in the federal court system. Again, if it's not successful at the district court, you have opportunities at the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then again, you have opportunities at the United States Supreme Court, which I think, especially with the composition of this court, feels very strong on First Amendment questions.
I don't read tea leaves either. I roll bones and then I read them. So no,
That's weird.
I'm Scandinavian by descent. I have no qualms about being weird. No, I don't see this making out of the district court, to be honest with you. I just cannot imagine that the federal district court is going to go anything other than City of Benson. What? Are you serious right now? Like on its face.
That's kind of what I said when they gave me the first citation. I was like, are you serious right now? Like, this is public property, bro. People are walking all over the place. What are you talking about?
Do you see this forcing the city to acquiesce pretty quick? Do you think? Like, I can't imagine that if the district court says you guys are crazy, I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff, that they're gonna go, I think we should take this higher. I can't imagine them being willing to do that at this point.
Yeah, I think, if we're successful at the TRO hearing, now granted, the TRO hearing, the standard for success at a TRO is much higher than when you actually get to the hearing on the merits. So it is more difficult to get that TRO, but that's the first opportunity. If we prevail this week on that hearing, very likely that the city would not continue to fight it. They could, but it would be less likely. I think also in these situations, a lot of times what you see, the vast majority of the cases that we file, they actually don't ever see a ruling, because so many of the cases you file, when it comes to constitutional rights and local municipalities, you file the claim, they see that there is something there and something that can be done to improve, right? And a lot of times they will try to moot your case by giving you what you've asked for. So the best example of this is during COVID. We represented a family in Virginia, beautiful Catholic family with 10 children. Everywhere they went, they were in violation of Governor Northam's public gathering restrictions, which said 10 or more people, that's a large group, that violates the stay-at-home order. So we
violated the home gathering orders in Minnesota.
Yeah. So we filed the lawsuit there in Virginia, and as we step into this, all court at that time was over Zoom. So we're stepping into this Zoom courtroom. Commonwealth's counsel says, Your Honor, the governor has just amended the shelter-in-place order to allow for an exception for large families. So we got what we wanted. They mooted the case by giving us what we wanted, by curing the defect in their law, so that prospectively, those rights were restored. And municipalities have the opportunity in all kinds of cases to do things that are similar. Now, when you do file lawsuits, there are ways where you can seek damages as well. And then you have not just a prospective relief you're seeking, you have a retroactive relief you're seeking. So if they moot the prospective relief, they don't cure the retrospective. That's again kind of in the weeds. But here, I mean, there's certainly opportunity for them to restore Bryan's rights and to drop these ridiculous trespass citations and to clear that record.
Yeah, I could have nerded out on that, but I'm glad that you had the restraint, counselor, because I would have nerded out on that. So, Bryan, while this is going on, are you still able to go out and do things, or are you refraining from local activities while this is going on?
I try to go out locally. I was at the Kids Day Carnival, had several really good conversations and really good interactions. Those are also posted up on Equal Protection Minnesota's social media. I go to the Wilmer Stingers baseball stadium. I try to go there once a week, depending on the baseball schedule and whatnot. I'm also looking at other areas to go to. But I think it's wise counsel because of the position of the city. I don't want to go to federal court and have $10,000 worth of citation fines and 900 days in jail that I'm facing potentially, right? Because I'm already at $2,000 in 180 days. So there's the max that they could give me, which is just utterly ridiculous. But
just to clarify, you're not saying you're waiting to go to jail. Like that's what you're facing.
That's what I'm facing with these two trespass
I want the
citations
audience to know that you're not like literally been convicted yet.
No. But I think it's wise counsel to not go, even though I want to go to the market. And I want that to be very clear that this is preventing me from exercising my First Amendment protected right. Yeah. It is a governmental threat of arrest if I go and exercise the free right to speak at a public gathering. That is crazy.
It's absolutely destructive is what it is. It's beyond crazy. It's absolutely destructive. And like I said, I brought up Hendricks earlier. Now we've got you and we've got all this going on in Minnesota. And I'm glad to see that yours is moving at the pace it's moving at, and that you're going for that relief at a higher, there again, not superior, but at this higher court level, because this is the implications of of you losing or a conviction on this are staggering. They're just absolutely staggering. And people do not pay enough attention to these things. And like I said, a lot of times you just run into people who they don't know how else to take it. And they'll just go, well, you shouldn't have been doing it. And you wouldn't have gotten in trouble. It's like everybody going, I don't want to be constantly surveilled. Well, if you're not doing anything illegal, why do you care if you're being surveilled? That's not the point. That's not the point, people. So, I know that you guys have things to do, and I really appreciate you making time for doing this. You know, Bryan, I know better than to ask an evangelist if he's anything he wants to say. So,
well, it's funny that you asked, because I was going to say I would be remiss if I did not do what God has called me to do, and that is the following. It's not just abortion. It's not just fraud. It's not just the suppression of someone's right to speak. It is the evil of man's heart is in our nature. And we've all sinned, and we've all fallen short of the glory of God. And the wages of sin is death. But God sent his son, Jesus Christ, that if by faith that you may believe, which means to trust in Christ with an unbreakable trust in his finished work on the cross, that by grace through faith, you can be justified before your creator God. And you can be redeemed, reborn, remade. And you will no longer believe that it's okay to suppress someone's right to speak or someone's right to live or to justify that which cannot be justified. Because you will ultimately understand that the state or Bryan or Todd or Center for American Liberty, we are not the ultimate and final authority, but God is. James chapter 4, verses 11 and 12 tell us that if we judge one another according to our own standard, that we judge God and his law. but there is only one lawgiver, and that is God, he who can create and destroy. And this same God sent his son to die the death we deserve and bear the penalty of the sins that we have committed. And now he has commanded us all to repent and believe in the gospel, and through Christ, you too can be saved.
Like I said, you never ask an evangelist if you got anything else to say. That, folks, that is what they call the gospel. But promise me when this is all said and done, Bryan, we will stay in touch, but that we'll have you back on. And Mark, in all honesty, when this is all said and done, and I know it's never done for you because I know there's no shortage of cases coming to you guys. And we will make sure the link to your organization is in the description. Somehow I missed it when I was writing it up. I was just like, I wrote this whole thing up and put it in there, and I'm like, I looked at it this morning as I was logging in. I'm like, oh, I forgot the link to the organization. So, so we'll get it in there. I would love to have you or your staff or several of you or whatever to come on for like a roundtable conversation and just have a nerd out over philosophy on this and the work that you do, not about specific cases, but bring cases into it, but just how you guys got started and what made you decide to step in as CEO. You're filling big shoes. I know everybody has a lot of respect for Harmeet and what got started. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but one thing I think it's also important to say is that for someone like me, it's impossible for me to do this. I don't have the resources to do this. And so I depend on an organization like Center for American Liberty, like men like Mark and women like Courtney and the rest of the staff and team over there to be able to even have this fight. And so I really have to express to everyone listening and one who will watch that Center for American Liberty has done an amazing job of explaining the things that I don't understand, of walking me through the technicalities of the law, and by being for accurately and passionately representing my case and fighting it as if it was their own. And so I just really have to commend Mark and Center for American Liberty for doing that, and just say thank you. I have so much gratitude for you guys. Thank you so much.
It's our privilege. I mean, it's our privilege to be able to fight on your behalf, Bryan. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it too, because I like to watch anybody that wants to stop the erosion of our constitutionally enshrined rights. Kind of the whole thing of having a platform like this is to not have your rights eroded. They tried real hard with me, but I didn't go away. And I know the feeling of saying to yourself, I don't know how I would fight this on my own. So I appreciate both of you. I appreciate the work that you do, Bryan and Mark, especially you. And I will let you guys, I'll put you in the green room and you can monitor me to make sure I don't say anything that, the views of the host and the guests don't necessarily reflect, what's the,
yeah, make sure you don't mess up that disclaimer now.
Oh, yeah. don't mess it up. So give me a minute to close this out and I'll be right back to catch you guys after the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Oh, let's see here. I hate that big screen. There we go. That's much better. Folks, like left, right, center, to me, it doesn't matter. You guys know that I am not a red versus blue person. I hate that entire argument. Look, Mark said it during this conversation. The tool that's used against you will eventually, or the tool that you use against somebody you disagree with today will eventually get used against you. And the sooner you wake up to that, the better off you are. You may not like Bryan's message. You may think that it's nobody's business what a woman does with her body because you think that's what abortion comes down to. You may be convinced in your mind that abortion is just a woman doing what she wants with her body and that baby is nothing more than a clump of cells. You may be convinced of that, and therefore you may be fundamentally, philosophically, religiously uninterested in what Bryan believes and what he has to say. But that doesn't change the fact that you should be feeling obligated to defend him when he's saying it. And that's the greatest weakness of our culture and our society today. It's absolutely 100% the greatest weakness of our society today. If I disagree with you, you have no right to speak. That's what people believe. And I have personally stood shoulder to shoulder with people that are ideologically vastly different than me. I stood in front of them and defended them. Defended their freedom and their liberty to speak their mind, even though I disagreed wholeheartedly and fundamentally with every word that was coming out of their mouth. And I will continue to do so. It just so happens that I agree with Bryan's position on this. And so if you're watching this, whether you're opposing counsel, if you want to use that, or you're, somebody that doesn't like Bryan and what he does, and you're hoping that that Bryan loses, what you're ultimately hoping for is your own downfall. And I'll reiterate what I said earlier. You can oppose the state, you can oppose government, you can oppose the actions of cops on something and not hate them. It's absolutely imperative that you take that away. I don't hate the individual cops. I hate the fact that government has weaponized them against people who speak their minds. That's what I hate. And I cannot respect it when generations of law enforcement have, by my estimation, turned their back on doing the right thing in a lot of those moments. And as we both gave examples, there have been some very good ones that I've run into and that Bryan said he has run into. There are good ones that will stand up for what is right. But ask yourself what happens to the ones who finally speak out and say, I'm not doing this anymore. I, for one, can tell you what happens to them. They get rid of them. Sooner or later, they get rid of them. So be paying attention to Bryan's case, and when he wins this, we'll have him back on, and then I'll torture him. I'll hold up crayons on screen so he wants to eat them, but he won't be able to get to them. So, because it's the best way to lead a Marine away. Just show him a crayon and start walking. So, till next time, my friends, fight for your freedom. It is yours. Fight for your liberty. It belongs to you. And sic semper tyrannis.
We are go for liftoff in T-30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at